I am Evelyn Monroe, 40 years old, and up until last spring, I led a life so ordinary it hardly seemed worth recounting. To the outside world, I was just another dependable daughter, never the favorite, rarely the problem, always the one who showed up on time and stayed until the kitchen was clean. What no one suspected was the truth I kept buried for years, that every act of loyalty and sacrifice was building toward a reckoning I would never have believed possible. Before I continue, let me know where you're listening from. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, I think you'll find a bit of your story in mine. My family wasn't cruel, not in any way that would make the neighbors talk. No, their brand of harm was subtler, 1,000 tiny snubs, the jokes at my expense, the endless comparisons to my older sister Caroline. Caroline, with her honey blonde hair and easy smile, always seemed to draw light to herself like a sunflower in a summer field. She was 3 years older, the golden child in every sense: pageant, ribbons, scholarships, a wedding that filled the church to the rafters. When Caroline brought home a certificate or a trophy, our parents cheered and took photos. When I quietly graduated top of my class, Mother handed me a check for $300 and told me that should help with books. Evelyn, you're practical. Caroline is the dreamer. If you've ever been called practical as code for not quite enough, you'll know the sting I carried. Looking back, I see now how the pattern was always there. When I was 10, Mother promised me a birthday party, cupcakes, balloons, the works. But that morning Caroline had a piano recital. "We'll celebrate you next weekend," Mother said, barely looking up from tying Caroline's bow. There was no next weekend. That year my birthday was marked by leftover stew and silence. By high school, I stopped asking for anything at all. There were bigger wounds too. Caroline's college fund was ready before she finished 8th grade, a generous sum set aside by our grandfather. I learned about it the night before my own graduation, when my father told me, "We helped you as much as we could, Evelyn, but you're strong. Student loans build character." I took out $26,000 in debt and left for a state university while Caroline drove to Princeton in a new sedan. Sometimes I think the hardest blows were the ones that came disguised as love. When Caroline's marriage began to falter, it was me who showed up at midnight with groceries and paid the overdue mortgage, a sum of $12,000 that I wired through a friend so no one would know. When my mother needed a surgery she swore she'd never afford, I called the hospital's billing office and paid the balance, $18,000, under an alias. No one in my family ever suspected. They thought luck or kindness from strangers had intervened. If you're the sort of person who keeps on giving even after your well is dry, I want you to know you're not alone. Sometimes the ones who hold a family together are never recognized for the work. Still, I tried to keep the peace. At every holiday dinner, I was the one clearing plates while Caroline regaled everyone with tales from her glamorous job in event planning. When she landed a position at one of the top wedding venues in Los Angeles, our parents threw her a dinner party. When I got promoted at my own job, Mother nodded and asked if I would bring dessert. I should have seen the storm coming the day Caroline announced her engagement to Daniel, a rising tech entrepreneur. The wedding, she said, would be the event of the year, and of course she'd need all hands on deck. I didn't realize then that all hands meant mine alone, planning, organizing, and serving, never sitting as a guest. What I didn't know was that the invitation to help would set the stage for the greatest humiliation and the greatest reveal of my life. If you've ever found yourself the reliable one nobody appreciates, hit that like button or share a comment. The story I'm about to tell may just be yours too. As the wedding approached, I had no idea it would be the moment everything changed forever. The morning of Caroline's wedding dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect California days that seems to promise good things. I arrived at the grand venue, a sprawling estate on the edge of Beverly Hills, a full 3 hours before the first guests were due. Caroline's text the night before had been brisk. "Don't be late, Evelyn. There's so much to set up. You know I'm counting on you." I had already memorized the schedule, color-coded the seating chart, and double-checked the catering contracts. If I felt a pinch of resentment, I tucked it deep inside. This was family after all. The estate buzzed with activity as vendors hustled in and out. At the front entrance, staff in black uniforms loaded centerpieces and polished silver. I wore a simple blue dress, nothing too formal, nothing that would suggest I belonged among the guests. It was clear from the first moment that my role was not as a sister of the bride, but as someone responsible for the smooth running of the event. I'd been given a headset and a clipboard. Caroline had even handed me a badge, event support. It stung more than I expected. I caught my reflection in the glass and wondered if anyone would know I was family at all. Guests began to arrive in a parade of luxury cars, each one greeted by staff and directed to their seats overlooking the gardens. I barely had a moment to breathe as I coordinated deliveries and answered endless questions from the catering manager. Still, I watched my parents move through the crowd, all smiles and easy conversation, introducing Caroline to every VIP. When they passed me in the hallway, my mother didn't even slow her stride. "Evelyn, can you make sure the champagne is on ice? The florist is asking for you outside," she called, not bothering to meet my eyes. There was no mention of thanks, only expectation, only more work. If you've ever felt like the hired help in your own family, you know this pain. It is humiliation disguised as duty. The worst came when I slipped into the bridal suite to check on Caroline. She was surrounded by her friends, all laughter and perfume silk robes and champagne flutes. As I entered, one of her bridesmaids glanced up, eyes cool. "Oh, is that the wedding planner?" she asked. Caroline did not correct her. "I need you to steam my veil," Caroline said, handing me a crumpled piece of tulle. "And please stay out of the pictures unless you're actually doing something useful." Her words hung in the air, as cold as the marble tiles underfoot. I did as I was told, steam rising around me, my hands trembling only a little. Later in the kitchen, I heard laughter from the staff break room. Someone had forwarded a group chat, and, though they quickly hushed, as I passed I caught a glimpse of the message on the screen. "Don't let Evelyn into the family photo. She's here to keep the floors clean, not to be seen." There were emojis, little digital snickers, a private joke made public. I felt my cheeks burn, but I forced myself to keep moving. There was always one more task, one more small indignity. I brought out trays of hors d'oeuvres only to be shooed away by my mother. "Evelyn, not there. Stand by the kitchen. Let the professionals handle the front of house." All around, the celebration spun on without me, the practical daughter, the invisible one. Still, humiliation has a way of clarifying things. For every slight, I made a mental note. Every backhanded remark, every exclusion, every moment my presence was tolerated but never welcomed, it was all fuel for a reckoning I could feel coming closer. Even so, I smiled for the guests, kept the event on schedule, and refused to let the pain show. Sometimes the deepest revenge is simply surviving the storm, holding onto your dignity, while others try to strip it away. What none of them knew, not Caroline, not my parents, not a single guest sipping champagne under the twinkle lights, was that I was not just the support staff for the day. I was the silent partner, the co-owner of the very venue in which this fairy tale was playing out. A fact hidden behind contracts, LLC paperwork, and a different last name on the deed. And even as I retreated to the shadows, I could feel the winds shifting. There are moments in life when humiliation transforms into resolve, when you know deep down your time is coming. If you've ever stood quietly in the background, watching others take the spotlight while you did all the work, you'll know that feeling. Let me know in the comments if you've ever been there. As the first toast rang out and laughter echoed through the gardens, I couldn't have guessed how quickly the tables would turn or how public the reversal would be. There's a strange kind of clarity that settles in when you're standing at the edge of your own family's celebration, watching it unfold as a hired hand rather than a cherished guest. I moved through the evening like a shadow, never quite seen, never truly invisible. But beneath my calm exterior, something within me had shifted. It was no longer just about surviving the day. It was about reclaiming the narrative quietly, but with intention. After the main course had been served, and the band started playing softly in the background, I found a moment alone in the venue's small office. I closed the door, exhaled, and reached for my leather-bound portfolio tucked in the desk drawer. Inside were the documents that told the true story of the Monroe estate, a story my family never bothered to ask about. 3 years ago, I had taken a risk. With a modest inheritance from my grandfather, $650,000 to be exact, I purchased a 40% stake in a struggling events company. Through long nights and relentless work, that company transformed into Monroe Heritage Events, a business now valued at nearly $8 million. I kept my name off most of the public paperwork, opting to use a management firm and my middle name just to keep my family from ever connecting the dots. I was not just the event support for the night. I was the one who had negotiated the venue's acquisition, signed every check, and approved every contract, right down to the very one Caroline had signed for her wedding. I sat there in that small office, fingers tracing the raised seal on the ownership deed. There's a power in holding the proof quiet and absolute. For years I had wondered if the sacrifices were worth it. Now, as the laughter outside reached its fever pitch, I knew the answer. Just then, my phone buzzed a new email from the venue's legal counsel. The subject line read, "Urgent Trust Fund Update, Signature Required." My heart pounded not with fear but with anticipation. Attached was a scanned amendment to the family trust recently executed. The terms were clear: the majority of the Monroe Family Trust, $15 million, would remain in escrow, released only to the family member with verified majority ownership and active management of the Monroe Heritage Company. My role, it seemed, had been secured not just by effort but by legal decree. I smiled almost despite myself. For years I had let them define my worth. Tonight the facts would speak for me. I slipped out of the office just as a commotion began at the head table. Caroline's husband, Daniel, who had always eyed me with a kind of distant politeness, was waving his phone in the air. "Caroline, have you seen this?" he asked, his voice loud enough to carry. "There's a viral post going around, some group chat leak about the event staff. People are asking why your own sister is working the floor." Caroline's face tightened. I caught the flash of embarrassment, the way she glanced at our mother, hoping for support. Instead, our mother shrugged, her voice cool and dismissive. "Evelyn always did prefer being useful to being seen." The room grew quiet. Even the waiters seemed to slow, curious. There was an undercurrent of discomfort, as if everyone suddenly sensed something unspoken hovering just beneath the surface. Then from the back of the room a voice called out a guest I hadn't noticed before. She was elegant, poised, and unmistakably powerful. "Excuse me," she said, rising gracefully. "Are you Evelyn Monroe, the managing partner of Monroe Heritage Events?" Every eye turned to me. I felt the weight of their stares, the uncertainty, the expectation. I took a steady breath, stepped forward, and nodded. "That's right," I said, my voice even. "I am." The woman smiled. "I represent the board of the Heritage Trust. On behalf of the entire foundation, I want to thank you for your vision and integrity. It's rare to see such discretion and strength, especially in the face of public scrutiny." For a moment the silence was absolute. Then, as if on cue, phones began to buzz again. Messages, notifications, photos of the moment spreading among the guests. I saw the dawning realization in Caroline's eyes, the cold shock on my mother's face. Humiliation had shifted. The weight of all those years of being overlooked, belittled, and dismissed was suddenly lifted, not by anger or confrontation but by the simple, undeniable truth of who I really was. Sometimes vindication comes not with shouting, but with a single sentence spoken in public, witnessed by all the people who once made you feel small. If you have ever longed for that moment, the turning of the tables, the subtle but absolute victory, leave a comment or share your own story. Because tonight I was no longer invisible. I was the boss. But the night was far from over. The real shock was yet to come. The music had barely resumed when the shockwaves rippled through the reception hall. I had spent my entire life learning how to fade into the background, but at that moment, every head in the room turned to me. My phone vibrated in my palm, texts, photos, and questions flooding in as guests snapped images of the public exchange. Somewhere in the crowd, a video had already gone live, streaming to friends and strangers alike. For a heartbeat, I thought about escaping. There's a powerful urge to retreat when the spotlight is forced upon you, especially after a lifetime spent in the shadows. But I stood my ground. I had nothing left to hide. Across the room, Caroline's face strained of color. Her carefully composed bridal smile faltered, replaced by confusion, then panic. My mother reached out to steady her, but Caroline pulled away, her gaze fixed on me with a look that was almost pleading. Daniel, meanwhile, seemed transfixed, his phone forgotten as he watched the scene unfold. The guests whispered among themselves, curiosity giving way to the delicious anticipation of scandal. The elegant woman from the Heritage Trust spoke again, her voice steady, echoing off the chandeliers. "For the record, Miss Monroe is the majority stakeholder and managing partner of this property and of Monroe Heritage Events. Her leadership is the reason we chose this venue for our own foundation gala last spring. I trust the family is aware of her role." It was a question loaded with implication, and it landed with a thud at my parents' feet. My mother, always so adept at spinning a story, suddenly found herself without words. She cleared her throat, trying to regain composure. "Evelyn has always been very independent. We support her endeavors." The truth hung between us, impossible to ignore. Caroline tried to rally. "But why didn't you ever say anything?" she demanded, her voice high and brittle. "Why did you let us treat you like staff?" I met her gaze, steady and calm. "You never asked," I replied, my voice carrying farther than I intended. And sometimes it's easier to let people believe what they want. But tonight you asked me to serve, so I did. A hush fell over the room, guests, staff, even the band pausing to listen. I could sense a shift in the air, the way tension sometimes builds before a summer thunderstorm. And then in a moment that would be replayed for years to come, the venue's main projector screen flickered to life. I hadn't planned for this. One of the junior techs, recognizing me from board meetings, had decided to air the behind-the-scenes security footage. There for everyone to see was a loop of clips: my mother instructing me to clean Caroline, brushing past with a dismissive wave the kitchen staff gossiping about the helpful sister. The volume was low, but the words were clear. This house was never yours, Evelyn. You're just here to make sure things run smoothly. Don't let her in the family photo. We don't want to confuse the guests. Laughter from Caroline's circle of friends echoed through the speakers. The embarrassment was no longer mine. A ripple of discomfort ran through the wedding guests. Some looked away. Others took out their phones, recording the drama for posterity. A few of Caroline's old friends, a couple of whom I'd known since childhood, turned away, their faces flushed with sympathy or shame. The Heritage Trust representative watched in silence, her eyes unreadable. Then she leaned over and handed me a heavy envelope, sealed, stamped with a gold crest. The family trust requires your signature, Miss Monroe, for formal transfer. Your grandfather wanted you to receive it only when your contributions had been made public. I accepted the envelope, hands steady. Thank you. I'll review everything with counsel after the event. For the first time, my voice sounded entirely my own, no trace of apology or hesitation. It was then that Caroline broke. She strode forward, voice trembling with anger. You ruined my wedding, she hissed loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. Why couldn't you just stay out of sight? This was supposed to be my day. My mother tried to intervene, but I held up a hand. You asked me to help. I helped, but you don't get to choose which version of me you want just when it's convenient. I am more than the help. I am more than the forgotten daughter. Daniel stepped beside Caroline, uncertain for the first time all evening. Evelyn, is it true? All of this. I nodded. Every word. The business, the trust, all of it. He turned to Caroline, searching her face for answers. Did you know? She shook her head, tears threatening. No one ever told me. I could almost feel the old pattern trying to reassert itself, the urge to comfort, to minimize, to step back into the familiar role. But I didn't. Not this time. The projector flickered off, leaving the room in a hush broken only by the faint hum of the band searching for the right cue. I let the silence linger long enough for everyone to sit with what they'd witnessed. From the far corner, my father rose, his voice brittle but controlled. We are still a family, he said, addressing the room. We have our differences, but tonight is about celebration. I interrupted quietly but firmly. Tonight is about truth and about respect. If those aren't part of this family, then maybe it's time to rethink what family means. You could hear a pin drop. The Heritage Trust woman nodded once approvingly. I hope you all understand how rare true leadership island. Not everyone has the strength to stand quietly in the storm, and then when it matters most, to speak with clarity. I turned away from the head table, finally at peace. The sense of vindication was not sweet or smug, it was simply a deep relief, like breathing fresh air after a long confinement. I did not need anyone's permission to claim my worth. For the first time in my adult life, I felt whole. People approached me quietly, some offering apologies, others asking for advice or forgiveness. I accepted their words with grace, but I made no promises. If you have ever waited for the moment when the truth is finally seen, when the years of quiet suffering are balanced by a single act of courage, I hope you find it too. Sometimes it comes when you least expect it, sometimes right in the middle of someone else's fairy tale. As the crowd dispersed and the night drew on, I watched my family from a distance. Their world had been turned upside down, and I suspected that for once they would feel the absence of my silent labor. But I was done cleaning up after them. The next chapter of my life would be written on my own terms. When the last guests filed out under a haze of night, I lingered in the emptied ballroom, letting the sounds of laughter and music dissolve into memory. The lights above dimmed the air, sweet with the remnants of lilies and spilled champagne. Only the faint hum of the staff remained, a quiet army of workers restoring order to the aftermath of celebration and revelation. I stood among them, no longer invisible, no longer one of the unseen. News of what had transpired spread quickly. Before sunrise, the leaked video from the projector was already circulating online, gathering thousands of views and comments. The invisible daughter who owned the wedding, the headline read in one local write-up. Even those who did not know me found themselves caught up in the spectacle of reversal. The maid becomes the master, the silent one takes the throne. But for me, the satisfaction did not come from public embarrassment or the shocked messages pinging my inbox. It was something quieter, deeper, the knowledge that my value no longer depended on the scraps of approval doled out by those who had overlooked me. I had claimed my place without vengeance or spectacle. I had simply told the truth. The aftermath, however, was messier for my family. The next day, a flurry of calls and emails arrived from my mother and father, each more urgent than the last. My father's messages were filled with a bewildered hopefulness. "Let's talk, Evelyn. We're still family. We can fix this." My mother, less sentimental, sent a terse message about trust documents and the need to coordinate signatures for the inheritance. Caroline, for her part, went silent, her humiliation raw and unprocessed. Only Daniel reached out with an apology, a short, sincere note acknowledging that he'd never understood the dynamic in our family and wishing me happiness. I did not reply to any of them, not immediately. Instead, I spent the morning with the venue staff reviewing the event's final tallies and quietly authorizing bonuses for everyone who had worked late into the night. The staff, many of whom had known me only as the background support, looked at me with new respect, their congratulations offered quietly without fanfare. It was the kind of recognition I had always wanted, honest professional earned. Later that week, I met with my attorney at a sunlit cafe far from the family home. The envelope from the Heritage Trust sat heavy in my bag. My attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Lorraine, explained the terms. The transfer of assets was ironclad, contingent on public acknowledgement of my contributions and majority control of the business. The trust, valued at over $15 million, would remain in my name, untouchable by anyone else. "Do you want to notify your family about the transfer?" Lorraine asked, her tone careful. I considered the question. There had been a time when I would have sought reconciliation, maybe even forgiveness. But now I understood that boundaries, real, legal, and emotional, were the final act of justice. "Send them the formal notice," I replied, "and please remind them that any further communication should go through your office." Lorraine smiled, her approval unmistakable. "That's a good decision, Evelyn. Sometimes the best revenge is simply moving on." Back at the venue, a curious thing happened. Vendors and clients, having heard about the Monroe wedding incident, began requesting me by name. Bookings for the next year tripled in a matter of weeks, the story of the hidden owner turned hero spreading through industry circles. Some people approached me at community events asking for advice on standing up to family, on surviving in silence, on building a life no one believed you could have. My answer was always the same. You do not need anyone's permission to claim your worth. Sometimes you just need to stop asking for it. Still, my family was persistent. My mother arrived at the office one afternoon unannounced. Her face was carefully composed, but I could see the strain beneath. She pleaded for a meeting about the trust, about healing, about restoring the family's reputation. I listened out of respect for the years we had shared, but I did not offer comfort. "I'm proud of what I've built," I said, meeting her gaze. "But I cannot fix what you refuse to see. You taught me to be strong. This is what that looks like." She wept, then quietly, the first real tears I had ever seen from her. I did not cry. Word of our conversation must have reached Caroline, because a week later she called. Her voice was small, stripped of the confidence that had once filled every room. She apologized not just for the wedding, but for every slight, every moment she had chosen herself over her sister. "Will you ever forgive me?" she asked. I thought about forgiveness, about what it really meant. It is not forgetting. It is not excusing. It is simply the act of letting go, of refusing to carry another person's burdens on your own back. "I forgive you, Caroline," I said, and I meant it. "But I can't make things go back to the way they were. I don't want to." In the weeks that followed, the story faded from public view. Other scandals took its place, other families weathered their storms. But in my quiet corner of the world, a new sense of peace took root. If you have ever dreamed of the day when your silence is broken, your worth made visible, your boundaries respected, know that it is possible. You may lose the old version of your family, but you gain something better: self-respect, peace, and a future written in your own hand. Sometimes the final act of revenge is to simply refuse to be defined by anyone but yourself. As the season changed and the gardens at Monroe Heritage bloomed again, I looked out over the lawns filled with new couples and new celebrations. I felt no regret, no longing for the days when I stood in the shadows. Justice, I realized, is not about getting even. It is about standing tall alone if you must, and declaring that you will no longer be overlooked. And so I did. 6 months have passed since that unforgettable night at Monroe Heritage, half a year since my family's narrative was upended and I finally stepped into my own story. I often think about the days and years leading up to that moment, about all the quiet choices that led me here to a home that feels entirely mine. The house looks different now. The walls are painted soft, green and gold sunlight flooding the kitchen where, for the first time in decades, I linger over coffee without checking my phone for a summons from someone else's agenda. I've replaced the heavy velvet drapes with airy linen-planted roses along the fence and set up a long table on the patio where friends gather on Sunday afternoons. There are no more whispered reminders to keep the peace, no anxious glances over my shoulder, no invisible scorecards to settle. The air feels lighter, like spring after a long winter. These days, my mornings begin with a walk through the garden, coffee in hand, the scent of earth and growing things filling my lungs. Sometimes I pause beneath the old oak tree and simply breathe, grateful for the silence and the freedom. There's a peace in solitude, especially when you've spent most of your life chasing approval that never arrived. But it isn't all solitude. In the months since the wedding, a chosen family has grown around me, people who know my story, who respect my boundaries, who celebrate my wins and mourn my losses, as if they were their own. There's Linda, my business partner, who sends me fresh bread every Friday. There's Miguel, the head groundskeeper, who taught me to prune roses without fear. There's a small circle of friends from the local library, women and men who never once asked about my family but who remember my birthday and bring me lemon cake. The staff at Monroe Heritage no longer call me ma'am in the hallways. We share meals in the break room, we laugh about our mishaps and brainstorm ways to improve the business. For the first time, I feel truly part of a team, no longer the hidden owner, but a leader respected and trusted. Professionally, life has blossomed. With the trust secure and the company thriving, I've expanded our reach, offering scholarships to local students, creating jobs, and funding an arts program for teens. The boardroom is no longer a place of anxiety or fear. It is a place where my voice is heard and my decisions shape the future. I've been invited to speak at industry conferences not because of my last name but because of the work I have done. The emails I receive now are filled with gratitude and partnership, not demands for favors or explanations. As for my family, we have settled into a distant but civil peace. My father writes a letter every few months, his tone softer, more uncertain. He asks about the garden, about the business, about my health. My mother calls, sometimes her words cautious, never quite reaching the apology I know she carries in her heart. Caroline sent a Christmas card, simple and unsigned except for a line that read, "Wishing you the happiness you've always deserved." I wish them well, truly. I have no anger left, only a quiet understanding that we are all shaped by our wounds and that some gaps can never be fully closed. The house is quieter for it, but my life is fuller. If you have ever had to redefine your understanding of family or wondered whether blood alone should command loyalty, know this family is built day by day in small acts of care and consistency. The people who stand by you in the storm, those are your real kin. Some nights when the stars come out and the garden is silent, I sit on the back steps and reflect on the journey. I think of the young woman I was, desperate for validation, mistaking service for love. I wish I could reach back and tell her, "You are enough. You always were." To anyone listening who has felt overlooked, underestimated, or made small by the ones meant to cherish you, let this be your story too. Stand tall. Draw your boundaries. Choose your own worth, even if you must stand alone for a while. Have you ever had to walk away from those who could not see your value, or built a new family from the ground up, one gentle act at a time? I'd love to hear your stories, your lessons, your moments of courage. Leave a comment, share a thought, or simply know that you are not alone. I began this tale thinking it was about revenge. Now I see that it was always about freedom, the freedom to write your own ending, to forgive, and to begin again. As I turn off the lights each night and listen to the quiet, I am filled not with bitterness but with hope. Tomorrow will come as fresh and full of promise as the first bloom in spring. And I will greet it not as the forgotten daughter but as the architect of my own happiness.